Welcome one and all. It's time for yet another Warhammer the Old World Battle Report featuring the Dwarves against the vile, disgusting, hooven Beastmen. Now, when I put the word out that I was looking for a game of Old World this week in the old club chat, the reply that came in contained words such as tournament and practice and competitive. So I thought, why don't, for a change, I actually look at what the rest of the internet is doing, look at some of the successful dwarf lists out there, see what elements they have that I don't usually feature in my lists, and try and put together what I think is a pretty solid competitive list that might do alright in a tournament setting. So that was the goal, and we'll see how that works out against a competitive Beastmen list. Okay, in we go. So you can see here that we're going to be playing the Mountain Pass. This was just a random pile of cards, and this is the one that came out. So we didn't know whether it was going to be Mountain Pass or Open Battle or any of the others, and this was the terrain layout we got as well. So I'll take you through my list while you're looking at this wide view. You can see immediately that I've gone for the old dwarven sneaky trick of putting a massive unit of rangers behind the enemy, but we'll come to that in a moment. So what is the thinking behind this list? The thinking is all the Iron Drakes in the world. As many Iron Drakes as I own, cram them all into the list. What else do people put in their lists? Grudge Throwers. So we've got all the Grudge Throwers I own, which is 2. We've got Hammerers, we've got a character on Shield Bearers, we've got the Anvil, we've got a Gyrocopter, all things that are considered pretty good. Rangers, a big unit of those, they're considered very good. I haven't used up the entire core on one unit of Rangers, which I could have done. But we're going for a little bit of balance in there as well. We've got Giovanni and Alexander in the chat already. Good evening. So, let's go through what have we got here. We've got Burlock Daminson as the general. A controversial choice as general, but not necessarily as an inclusion, because stick him in a unit and they won't worry about -1 to hit from long range, which Iron Drakes might have to worry about at some point. We've got the Anvil. No runes on it at all, just keeping it nice and cheap. It's actually very tight, this list, actually. There's not a huge amount of upgrades on things, so I would have to take units out if I wanted to add more upgrades. Then we've got a Thane on Shield Bearers, and this is the BSB, and that BSB has the rune, Master Rune of Grungni. So 5+ ward save for the unit. Then that's all the characters. Into the core, we've got 14 Dwarf Warriors, hand weapon and shield, nothing fancy going on there at all. And then the other unit in core is this mighty unit of 22 Rangers, which is 363 points, because they've got all the upgrades, they've got shields, they've got crossbows, they've got throwing axes, they've got great weapons, and they've got the full command along with the Rune of Courage to make sure they're not going to run away at the sight of any terror-causing creatures. Now, I didn't know what I was going to be facing going into this game, by the way, so this is just a list that I thought would do well against most things. We've got the Colonel in the chat. Yes, Linehammer Part 2. There's only just one big line, though. No one else is really in such a ridiculous line. Then, if we go back to my special, so we've got the 2 Grudge Throwers, nothing on them at all. But they are in range of Burlock, so he's going to be able to let them reroll the misfire. So there isn't a regular engineer, just Burlock. And if you're taking a nice big ranged unit or 2, he seems like an auto-include for me. He's not that expensive. And he gives them such a nice buff, and he's leadership 10. So I think he's the cheapest source of leadership 10 you can actually take in the dwarf list. I could be wrong on that, but it's one I can see that's quite cheap. Now, I was considering when I made the list that he could go into the massive Ranger blob as well. But obviously they've decided to scout in this game, so he's not going to be doing that. But the Iron Drakes were there as the backup for him. So if I'd had a more favourable hill, for example a nice wide hill that wasn't lengthways, then I could put a full unit of Rangers on there and stick Burlock in with them, and that would be quite good. We've got Wraith in the chat, good evening. Then, what else we've got in special? We've got the Gyrocopter, just with a steam gun, nothing fancy, just the one Gyrocopter. Then we've got 12 Hammerers, and they are of course joined by the BSB. They do not have any standard runes, so controversial. What they do have is a rune of speed on the champion. The thinking behind that is to give the champion a magical weapon. And do the hammers have magical weapons generally? Are their hammers considered magical? I think they are anyway. So yeah, that wasn't a particular reason to put rune of speed on him. But what I'm thinking is challenges. I'm not going to be reducing the opponent's initiative because I've not taken any of those runes on the hammer unit. So I've not taken hesitation or the other one. So my plan with them, because of that, is to put them up close behind units that might get charged, and then if those units die, for example this small unit of Iron Drakes, then you can rune the hand weapon, not the hammer. Dun dun dun. Okay. Noted for future. I don't think it makes a huge difference in this game, but I will keep that in mind. So, if this unit, for example, gets killed and then they overrun, I've got them close enough that, and I'm going to bring them closer as well as we move into the game, even closer behind the Iron Drakes. The enemy, when they overrun, are not going to get a significant initiative bonus. I'll get the +1 initiative for being hammerers charged in the front, and they'll get the extra attacks as well. So keeping them fairly cheap. Then we've got 3 units of Iron Drakes in the rare section. 2 units of 5 with just a torpedo. 1 unit of 10 with a full command torpedo. They all have Cinderblast bombs. The unit of 10 also has the musician and the standard bearer. And that standard bearer has the master rune of hesitation. So 10 Iron Drakes with Burlock. And if you charge them, you're not getting your impact hits. And you're not getting your use of lances or anything else you would have on the charge. Because Iron Drakes do not like being hit by impact hits. That's one thing that tends to chew through them quite easily. So let's just get rid of impact hits entirely on this big unit of 10. And I'm keeping them at the front, because otherwise, why would the enemy ever charge them? They'll just charge the little units. So I'm keeping them a little bit further back. And as the game goes on, I'll try and reposition them to make it less likely that these ones will get charged by any big, significant threat. In terms of layout, we've got the hammerers backing up on this side, we've got the dwarf warriors backing up on that side. On the hill, the anvil is fairly close to the front. The grudge throwers as far back as they can be, really. And let's go through the Beastman list then. So we've got a Razor Gore. We've got several chariots. So the ones with spikes on the front are wizards. I think that's correct. We'll find out when they start moving anyway, I'll remember them. And then 2 normal chariots as well. So 2 chariots that are quite fighty, 2 that have level 4 wizards on them, one of whom can reroll wounds, whichever item does that for the Beastmen. So they've both got Vile Tide, one of them re-rolling, so anyone who knows anything about Beastmen knows that that is quite a scary prospect. We've got a big just block of infantry there with a bull in with them. We've got a large spawn. Now this big spawn is actually a large target, so I'll be able to shoot over things to hit that. We've got a unit of 3 Dragon Ogres. Got some more chariots on this side, 1 fighty one and the wizard, another wizard. We've got another Razor Gore there, which is this giant insect. We've got some harpies hiding behind the woods. And on this side, we've got 2 Razor Gore, and we've got another Dragon Ogre unit. So, when this all deployment was going on, I suspected I might be going first, because I've got less drops than the enemy. However, that's not how it went. I actually end up losing the dice roll, so the Beastmen are going to go first. What I was hoping for with this here is that if I got to go first, and chances are I was more likely slightly to go first, the Rangers were just going to completely obliterate something turn 1 with their 22 crossbows. Whether that's some Dragon Ogres or one of the chariots, or maybe one of the wizard chariots would have been a great target. Drop rocks on their heads as well. That was the plan. Move the Iron Drakes up a little bit to fire the torpedoes, and move the hammerers up behind as well. However, I do not get the first turn, so that's irrelevant. We'll move on to what happens in the Beastmen turn. So my gyrocopter, since it moved out 9 inches, I didn't quite move the full, because I wanted it to be a very difficult charge for the Razor Gore, so they do attempt to charge. Gyrocopter obviously flees, because why would you want to get charged in the first turn? And there you go, they make it halfway across the table. The Harpies move to threaten the flank of my Rangers, and I'm not concerned by this at all. What I really want to happen with the Rangers is that something significant turns round to deal with them. Because if it's anything that fights, you're not going to win against 22 Rangers with great weapons, probably. Any of these fighty units. If multiple units turn round, then that's great, because that's not much of an army walking towards me then. If anything turns round with shooting attacks, such as the Wizards, that means they're not focused on the rest of my line as well. And we do have magic resistance all over the place, so maybe some spells could fail. Everyone starts moving up. So these two are the Wizards, which is why they have stayed back. Because, okay, the spiky ones are the fighty ones then. Spike equals fight. So the two Wizards hang back because what they want to do is cast spells at my Rangers. The Beastman player has obviously determined that this is a significant threat, and if all you do is walk forwards, you're just going to get shot in the back for the entire game. Which is a valid concern, although with the Harpies there, that could be a minor annoyance to them. We've got Eric in the chat. Good evening. So let's see what these Wizards can do with Vile Tide. Well, that's like half a unit of Rangers gone immediately. And a few more. And another Vile Tide, and we're down to 3 Rangers out of 22. So 19 Rangers killed by 2 Vile Tide and a Wind Blast, I think. And that's about it. I think those were pretty much the only spells that went off. So it's the 5d6 hits at strength 1. So you're looking for 6s to wound, but one of them can reroll wounds. So you can possibly end up... You'd expect, on average, of 5d6 looking for 6s to wound, how many do you get? Like 3 or 4? But with rerolls, obviously, that goes up significantly. And if you roll quite well, this is what happens. So the Rangers do pass their panic check, though. Only 3 of them left, so they're not really a force in the rest of the game. However, we have got the enemy Wizards further away from us now. So maybe I can live with that, but it was a very potent round of magic. Next, going into my turn 1. So the Rangers turn around to face the Harpies, just in case they wanted to charge me, and I can fire off a few ponderous shots at them as well. The 2 Grudge Throwers take aim at the large spawn, because this thing has random movement. So it could potentially deny me a stand and shoot, which we don't want. We want to just kill that first. I've deemed that to be the biggest threat. Giovanni says that spell is way too good with that combo. It definitely is, yes. But this is a hardcore competitive list. I knew this kind of thing was coming going in. So, just to look at the enemy line here, I'll tell you why this thing is a threat. With it being random movement, if it reaches this unit of 10 Iron Drakes, it's going to deny my stand and shoot. And that would be terrible, because this unit could possibly then die. And even if they don't, they're then locked in combat, and then going to get charged by other things later. So this is the big threat. Everything else I'll be able to stand and shoot against. So this is target priority 1. Then anything else that's within range to charge. So for example, we're going to ignore this one Dragon Ogre for the time being. We're going to try and shoot these 2 Razor Gore, because they're definitely in range. And maybe some of the Chariots as well can be targets. The Dragon Ogres will only be a target if there's nothing else that I think is worthy. And in this situation, actually, with the 10 Iron Drakes, everyone else would get at least some cover against them. Because if you look at this spawn, a lot of them won't be able to see the entire unit. So I'm going to probably shoot the Dragon Ogres with them. This small unit is going to go into the spawn along with the Grudge Throwers. So the first stone scatters and lands on the Dragon Ogres and kills one of them, which is nice. And yeah, so it scattered off its original target, but did a pretty good job there. Then the Iron Drakes fired in, and I don't know if the rock actually fully killed one of them. It might have taken off just 2 wounds. But then the Iron Drakes did some more shooting on them. You can see the Iron Drakes have been buffed by the anvil, so they've got reroll saves now. Giovanni, isn't the spawn a large target? Yes, I did mention that. I totally forgot that during the game, actually. It's because the actual model isn't particularly taller than things around it, so I think that just slipped out of my mind when I was declaring my shooting, because otherwise I would have targeted this thing big time. So, we've got more wounds dished out. You can see a Razor Gore there down to 1 wound, a Dragon Ogre with 2 wounds left. The 5 Iron Drakes out on this flank. The Hammerers have moved up behind them, like I described, so any enemies that charge the Iron Drakes wouldn't get much of an initiative bonus when they overrun. And they do... how many units were over there? Let's just wind back a second. So, There's a chariot. There's a razor gore. I think they fired into the spawn as well, but they didn't do too much to it. The anvil, what can that do? Well, we've got another razor gore down to 1 wound. So, into the Beastmen turn 2 now. So in classic Dwarven fashion, I've left lots of units alive with a wound or 2 left on models. However, stand and shoot is very much in play. So let's see if the enemy actually takes some charges on. So, Earthen Ramparts, which is going to give this chariot, one of the wizard chariots, a ward save, I believe. Then we've got some charges. So 2 Razor Gore into the small unit of Iron Drakes, along with this 1 Razor Gore into the Iron Drakes. And I stand and shoot against the unit that's got more wounds in it, because if I then roll really well, I could kill 2 instead of 1. And I do actually kill both of them with that stand and shoot, and the other one fails its charge. So that went really well. Oh, by the way, if you didn't notice there, the gyrocopter has just flown up into the flank of the enemy. Wasn't able to shoot last turn because it marched, but it is poised, ready to strike at the enemy now. The rest of the enemy units are not too wild about charging yet, and it's easy to understand why, because if you make the charge, or if you declare the charge, I then get a stand and shoot. You're giving me an extra shoot, and if you're not going to make the charge, because it's quite an ambitious long one, then you're not going to move as far as you would through marching. So you want to get as close as possible and then charge, unless you think you can actually succeed with the charges. You can see the spawn didn't go very far with its random move either, so that's good. But you don't want to eat more rounds of unnecessary shooting when you weren't going to make the charge anyway, so that's why most things did not charge. The chariots have all moved up into striking distance now. The good thing about Iron Drakes, of course, is that they can stand and shoot from point-blank range. The Trollhammer Torpedo cannot, but we do have Cinderblast Bombs as backup as well. So a decent round of shooting in the last turn for me. Didn't do too much damage, and this turn I actually probably killed more on the enemy turn than I did in my own through the stand and shoot of this unit into that double Razor Gore unit there. Okay, so we've got one more turn now. It's about to be my turn. I'm going to have to blast as much as possible because otherwise I'm going to start getting hit. So this thing has to die, this spawn. I don't like the look of its face, and if it hits anything, I can't stand and shoot against it, which is bad. Okay, we've got one of the wizards stays back with a bit of Vile Tide action and finishes off the rangers. So they're totally dead now, and the harpies flew out from this position back there, forwards behind the woods again, ready to strike. So those are all the dead rangers. The entire unit's gone. And had I gone first, I think they would have done a really good job from that position I put them in. But going second against double Vile Tide, one of them re-rolling wounds, it's an uphill struggle. But it has kept the enemy far away with its most powerful units. Because I did ask my opponent whether the whole list is just a Vile Tide delivery system, and I was told no, actually the rest of the units can actually put out some damage as well, but those are probably the strongest parts of it. So, my turn too. I start blasting. The Iron Drakes kill another Dragon Ogre, so there's one with very few wounds left. The other Iron Drakes take some wounds off this single Dragon Ogre. The Grudge Throwers don't do much, but with the Anvil fires as well. And with that, who was there behind the Dragon Ogre? So I think there was a Razor Gore there that got killed by the Anvil. Because otherwise, hold on, was it a Razor Gore or is that the Razor Gore there? Let me go back and see what unit was in that position. So we've got Dragon Ogre, Razor Gore, Chariot, Dragon Ogres. Let's see how it looks different now. So I don't know if I actually deleted anything with the Anvil. Then into the enemy turn, because it's not the most successful round, but this chariot, you'll notice, is behind the enemy. So let me go back to see where it was in the last turn. So this chariot that was hanging out here is now behind the enemy. I think it was that one. Or did this one just move and I killed that one? Let me see. Here. 1, 2, 3. So 4. So you know I haven't killed the chariot. So into the enemy turn. And Plague of Rust is cast onto the big unit of Iron Drakes. You can see I've had their armour buffed as well through that. So Plague of Rust is going to counteract that nicely and make them quite vulnerable again. Remember, this unit, whenever I'm firing, I'm not suffering -1 from long range because we've got Burlock in there. Earthen Ramparts on the Wizard on a Chariot again. A couple of charges go in, a Chariot and a Dragon Ogre into the small unit of Iron Drakes. A Razor Gore and a Dragon Ogre into the big unit of Iron Drakes. So let's see what the Stand and Shoot can do. Well, the Stand and Shoot here kills the Dragon Ogre. The Stand and Shoot here, because this guy charged in. I don't think I did too much with that Stand and Shoot. So it does get in. We've got one Razor Gore into the small Iron Drake unit. We've got one Razor Gore into the big Iron Drake unit, obviously with no impact hits. And we've got a Chariot into the small Iron Drake unit on that side. So the enemy are where they want to be, which is fighting. And everyone else is just shuffling around at the back. And if they could munch through this entire line, suddenly they can get into some of the juicy underbelly, like the Anvil and the Grudge Throwers, which are going to give up points without too much of a fight. Hammerers are obviously a significant threat with a Thane in there as well. And the Chariot here actually wounds itself going through the difficult terrain, which is quite amusing. You can see how much damage I did with the Stand and Shoot because I've put these orange dice there for combat resolution purposes. So I think they all did 2, which is okay. I think the one I was shooting here only had 2 wounds left anyway. Then into combat. The Iron Drakes actually win the combat. And I think I wanted to restrain there rather than pursuing after a Razor Gore because I could just stand back and shoot it, but I failed the leadership test, so they have to follow up into it. You can see some Hammerers that I lost there from the spells from this wizard. So I'm guessing that was Vile Tide as well. If you see any dead dwarves, just assume it was Vile Tide. The unit of 5 Iron Drakes is killed by the Chariot, who then overruns into the Anvil. Not quite far enough to get its full impact hits, I think, in the next round, which is good. And you can see that these Iron Drakes defeated this Razor Gore, who fled in the following turn, and threw their own unit of beasts. And the Iron Drakes are just kind of hanging out there now. So that's how it looks at the end of the turn. Yeah, that was the enemy turn 3. I think I've just forgot to take a picture of the dice earlier. Into my turn 3. So the Hammerers are just angling themselves, waiting for something to hit them. And as soon as they lose a few, because they had lost about 6 actually, so it is significant, just to 1 spell. And the Iron Drakes here blasting away into the centre. You can see one of the wizards has taken some wounds. They do often have ward saves on them. One of them's been Earthen Ramparted and the other one just has a ward save inbuilt. Or it might be regeneration that they both have, 5+. You can see the Gyrocopter's positioned to flame one of the Harpies to death. The Anvil is hanging on against the Chariot there, 2 wounds remaining. And not much accomplished that turn, didn't manage to do any big damage with the rocks. And into turn 4 for the Beastmen. So what am I worried about in this round? If the Anvil gets overrun, then I'm not too happy. What I should have done in this turn actually was angled the Dwarf Warriors towards that Chariot, rather than keeping them facing forwards, because I don't think this unit of Iron Drakes is going to be too troubled by these units around now. So, and I don't think this unit is going to reach the Iron Drakes, because it'll get stuck on the small unit and then end up fighting the Hammerers, which I'm cool with. So this unit should have just turned to face that way a little bit, so they could potentially help out in a fight there between the Anvil and the Chariots, because that's a lot of points in the Anvil, even though it's naked and has no upgrades on it. Turn 4 for the Beasts, so Plague of Rust again onto the Iron Drakes there, the big unit of 10. We've got a charge from this infantry unit led by a bull. I think, are they Gore or Bestigore? I can't tell from looking at them. I feel like they're Gore. Do Bestigore have masks on or something? I can't remember what the difference is between Gore and Bestigore anymore. Then we've got the Harpies charging into one of the Grudge Throwers. Regular Gore. We've got Bad Squiddo Games, who is obviously an old world fanatic, furiously painting away at ghouls so that one day we can see Annie lead an army of the horrible, vile undead onto the table. Giovanni says, Bestigor have great weapons. That sounds about right to me. A small chariot in the woods charges into the hammerers and will get impact hits because, remember, I've got the Master Rune of Hesitation on the Iron Drakes, not the hammerers, to see how that goes. And you can see the Razor Gore there on its own is continuing to flee. It did not rally, so it's still running away. So the Iron Drakes do a couple of damage to the Gore unit with Stand and Shoot. And these Harpies do not succeed with their charge, thankfully. Then it's time to Vile Tide the Iron Drakes. So we've lost 5 already, and then another 4. So a couple of Vile Tides, and then the whole unit's gone. So these 2 level 4 wizards have just deleted. Let's see, it took them a round to pretty much kill a 360 point unit of Rangers, and then it's taken them exactly 1 turn to kill 10 Iron Drakes and Burlock. Well, isn't that sad? Because in the previous turn, the Iron Drakes actually did really well. As you'll remember, they got charged by something. Who was it? It was... I think it was not a Bestigor, it was a Razor Gore. And Burlock actually damaged himself that turn, which is why there was a dice next to him. So it was a bit easier to kill him, but I think Vile Tide took them off anyway. So the big, expensive shooting unit has been killed by 2 spells, which I could not shut down because the Anvil's in combat. And it's tempting to think, could I have done with a Rune Smith or something in that unit to give them better magic resistance and to put some runes of spell breaking on it? But, as I said, this list is extremely tight, and I don't know what I would remove so that it still works the same way. There's something to think about, though. If I want to add anything else, something significant has to go. I can't just ditch upgrades left and right, because there aren't that many of them that I don't think are critical. So it's looking not great suddenly, because the Iron Drakes, they're still hanging in actually against the Gore, because there's not that many of them in the front rank, and if the Bull doesn't do very well, then you've got half a chance. So in the next turn, a couple of Hammerers get killed by the Chariot, but then the Hammerers win the combat and overrun right up behind the Iron Drakes in case they get killed. We lose a couple more Iron Drakes. The Anvil is still fighting valiantly against this Chariot, who's no longer getting impact hits, but we are down to just 1 wound on the Anvil now. This Chariot has, I think this is the one that's the Wizard, isn't it? And there's the other one. But look at that blurry human hand reaching out for the Razor Gore to continue moving it as it's still fleeing, I think. Then into my turn 4. Giovanni says, to add something, I think you can drop 5 Iron Drakes or the Hammerers and then change a lot in the list. Definitely can. Those are things that can certainly be dropped and free up some points, but where do you then invest those points is the question. And is it too much to take out? So one of the Grudge Throwers in turn 4 blows itself up, which is very sad. And the other one lands a direct hit onto the enemy General's Chariot and does a couple of wounds. There's only 2 wounds left. And at this point my opponent was pondering whether the General should just run away and hide now, instead of risking giving up loads of points. The Jankmaster says pony carts. Pony carts are definitely a solid option. However, they do cost the same as, I think they're about the same as a Gyrocopter and or a Doomseeker. So they really compete for that inexpensive unit slot. They all have different strengths and weaknesses though. Doomseekers obviously don't cost anything if they get killed, and they're very scary in combat. So the pony cart buffs surrounding units. Gyrocopters are very fast. Then, well, what's going on here? My Gyrocopter charged into the other Wizard Chariot, hoping to just stay in combat with it for a turn, so that it can't do any spells. Which is something that maybe I should have thought about this earlier in the game, to try and shut down the Vile Tide by just getting into combat with it. But obviously the Gyrocopter is not guaranteed to do that. It's not great at fighting, but it is toughness 5, so it is going to stand up okay against the onslaught. And I think I end up winning combat and then keeping up with it. The last of the Iron Drakes do get killed, and the Gore end up overrunning into the hammerers. I think they failed their restrain test as well. Ploughed into the hammerers, so now we're going to get a real fight. Gore and a bull against hammerers and a thane. Now, because they haven't travelled very far, I may well be striking first with the hammerers. Then, you can see here that the chariot and the anvil are still duking it out. 1 wound left each, and I do turn my dwarf warriors a little bit to actually face this chariot now. Okay, so it was looking quite bad at the start of that turn. Suddenly it's looking a bit better, because we've got this guy locked down, and that's important. Turn 5, and by the way, dwarf war machines and the anvil are immune to vile tide because their toughness is too high. So you can't vile tide them, because it's only strength 1. Turn 5 for the beasts. So, Plague of Rust onto the hammerer unit, which is going to drastically increase the number of them that get killed if they take any hits. The Gyrocopter gets flank charged by some harpies to try and free up the wizard. The Razor Gore continues its flight across the table. It's going to take a while to run all the way off the table though. The enemy general uses Vile Tide and kills 5 dwarf warriors, which is a respectable amount, and then kills another 3 with a second spell, which I think may have been Wind Blast. Giovanni says, I think you can add a Runesmith with 2 spell breaking, or 3. Runesmith, I do like them. They also obviously increase the armor bane of units they're in. So it's not purely there for anti-magic. I do like taking solo Runesmiths. Particularly if I'm running an even bigger unit of Rangers, so that you can get them up to Armor Bane 4 if you set them up within distance of the deployment zone, so the Runesmith can walk in with them if he's not deploying with them. What's this? The Anvil of Doom kills a chariot. My Anvil does not usually do anything. It usually succeeds with some spells, enemy come into range, shut down my spells, something charges it, and it dies. But on this occasion, it actually survived against a Beastman chariot, so we'll take it. The Gyrocopter does get killed, unfortunately, though. So we've got 1 Shaman that's been freed up, and another one that's right here. So, after the combat, the Hammerers win, because the Thane and the Bull got into a challenge, and the Thane actually took a couple of wounds. I didn't do any back to the Bull, because I haven't kitted out this Thane for combat, or defense really. I've only given it the 5-up Ward rune, no other upgrades on it whatsoever, apart from the Shield Bearers. So it's purely there as a BSB, to provide a ward save, and to be a wound sponge against big scary things like that. And I win the combat, the Hammerers kill quite a few Gore. They fall back in good order. I overrun into the General's chariot. So I've got a chance to kill this now. So that's nice. Into my turn 5. And I do win combat against the General's chariot, but I do not do any wounds to it, sadly. And it falls back in good order, and then I overrun again, back into the Gore unit. The Anvil attempts to kill the other chariot there, but fails, and I also fail to drop a rock on it. But I've turned my Dwarf Warriors sideways now in case anyone charges the Anvil, and I get a chance to then charge them. So they're primed and ready for that defensive mission. And the game is very much in the balance right now. If nothing else dies, we've mostly got our expensive units alive. I've got Hammerers are quite expensive, the Thane and the Anvil are quite expensive. The Grudge Thrower and the Warriors are cheap-ish. The enemy have got 2 level 4s, so that's going to be a lot of points. If I could finish off this Gore unit, that would be a good chunk. We've got 1 Razor Gore fleeing and some Harpies that are very inexpensive. So everything alive is condensed into this area, plus this fleeing unit here. So it's looking very close, going into the final turn for the Beastmen. So the Razor Gore is still fleeing, so I'm going to get some points for that. The Wizard, this one's not the General, charges at the Anvil and gets in there. You can see the Anvil gave itself reroll saves on the previous turn. 1 wound left. The Harpies make it into the Grudge Thrower as well, hoping to lock that down for turn 6. And we'll see how this combat goes. So the General actually positioned itself so that should I win the combat against the Gore unit again, an overrun, I would crash straight into the chariot instead. And you can see that with some magic spell casting, this Dwarf Warrior unit is down to 2 models. But that could be important. So we get into combat. The chariot takes a wound. The Anvil does not take any wounds and survives, I kill the Gore down to 1 and the Bull, and then they fall back in good order, and I overrun into the General's chariot, so I've got one more chance to kill that now. And the Grudge Thrower actually wins against the Harpies, so I think they give ground though. So I'm going to have one more shot with the Grudge Thrower this turn. So, my turn 6, and what do I want to do from this position? These 2 Dwarf Warriors want to charge this chariot, not because they're going to kill it, but because there's a champion in this unit who wants to issue a challenge to the Sorcerer in there to stop it from attacking the anvil, because it's only got 1 wound left. It got lucky to survive this round, so charge in there, challenge with the champion, and hopefully don't get squashed by too much. But then again, even if I do flee, the anvil's not going to die because it's unbreakable, so maybe one Dwarf Warrior would run away and possibly get cut down, but they do have good leadership. Turn 6 for me. So, well, you know that plan I had with charging into the flank? It doesn't happen if you roll a double 1 on the dice. Wow, wow, wow. So I think I needed a 2 or a 3 on one of the dice to make it in there, and I got a couple of 1s instead. I think that was a good idea, though. Then, the anvil, ultimately, because of that, gets killed by the chariot. It does a wound on the way down, though. And over here, I do 1 more wound to the shaman on the chariot there, the level 4, but sadly do not take the last wound off it. I lose my hammer champion, that's it. So, the Razor Gore's still fleeing, and that's how the game ends. So, after doing some maths, we worked out that if the anvil did not die, it's a draw. If the anvil did not die and I killed this guy who's on 1 wound, then I would win. If the anvil does die, which is what happened, the anvil dies, this guy survives on 1 wound, so it's a narrow win for the Beastmen. And I feel like that is a pretty good proof of concept for this list. The Iron Drakes did very well with their shooting. They obviously died when they got hit with the double Vile Tide, but that thing's just horrible, and I don't know a particularly good strategy of dealing with that, except maybe putting a Runesmith in there with some auto dispels. The Hammerers did okay, actually, with the Thane in there. They kind of did their job. The Dwarf Warriors, they survived, so you would say they did their job, apart from failing that charge by rolling a double 1. So, yeah, it's obviously only a friendly practice game, so you don't have to worry too much about the result and any wild dice rolls that occurred. The one Grudge Thrower blowing itself up obviously helped as well, helped to turn it into a Beastman win, so it was very narrow. So, yeah, I could have obviously gone first as well, could have had the chance to go first, which would have meant an extra round of shooting before the enemy got to me, and a round of shooting with the full-strength Ranger unit, who didn't really get to participate in the game because they just got Vile-tided to death. Is Vile-tided the way you would say that? Let's go with that. So they died immediately. Had I gone first, they could have definitely killed something with 22 crossbows. They could have killed a chariot, at least. So yeah, I think that's a pretty good list. Feels quite powerful. I'm going to tweak it. What do we think should be left out? Do you think 1 unit of 5 Iron Drakes could be ditched? We're missing out on a Trollhammer Torpedo then, though, which could be a problem. Do you think the Hammerers are a good fit? Do you think I should get rid of the Dwarf Warriors and replace them with just an enormous unit of Rangers? Is there anything else you think I should put in the core? I could put more shooting units in there instead, like Thunderers. I could have Warriors with great weapons. So looking at the various options here, I could also run a different army type, because this is just the standard Dwarven Mountain Holds list. This isn't the Expeditionary Force or the Royal Clan. Now, I don't know if you can take this exact list in either of those. You can't take it in the Engineers list, I think, because in there you don't get Iron Drakes. You can't take it in the Royal Clan because you don't get the Gyrocopter in there. You also don't get Hammerers in the Expeditionary list. So maybe you could get fairly close to this with the Royal Clan, which would then allow some different core choices, but then you can't have Rangers in core with Royal Clan, I believe. Let's have a look at the core options for the Royal Clan. Longbeards, which is always a good choice in core. Quarrelers, Royal Clan Warriors, and Slayers, who are obviously not very good at the moment. And then you can take Rangers in rare. where they're competing with the Iron Drakes. So it wouldn't work exactly like this in Royal Clan either. Do I miss the Doomseeker? Yes. Do I think a Doomseeker is better than a Gyrocopter? I don't believe so. One occasion where it would have been nice to have a Doomseeker, this situation where I forgot to turn around my Dwarf Warriors to face the other chariot when it was fighting the Anvil the first time. A Doomseeker there is actually a big threat. If the Anvil you assume is going to survive one round against things, which it often does, then a Doomseeker charging in there, and especially if it's like a hero, and issuing a challenge against it to protect the Anvil, potential options there, and you're not giving away victory points for either, so a good role, maybe a bodyguard for a Doomseeker. What else? The 2 Grudge Throwers did alright in this game, landed a few direct hits. They managed to kill some Dragon Ogres. They didn't finish off an awful lot of stuff, but they did good wounds to things. The Iron Drakes were definitely very potent, though. Whatever the Iron Drakes targeted, they did good damage to. Whatever the enemy Viletide targeted, they just deleted. So, considering mine was way more of a gun line, those 2 enemy spells possibly killed way more points than the Iron Drakes did. But you are investing a lot of points in 2 level 4s for the Beastmen, I imagine. 2 level 4s on chariots. 1 with the reroll wounds upgrade. I don't know how expensive that is. If anyone's in the chat who would know that off the top of their head. Giovanni says, in the Royal Clan you can't have Burlock. Yes, there are definitely some issues with switching it to Royal Clan or Expeditionary Force, but you can do this similar kind of list archetype in Royal Clan, because I think you can take the Iron Drakes in that one. You just have to fill the core with something else, so you can't have the Rangers. So I'm probably not going to switch it to either of those yet. I'm going to tweak it just within the normal Dwarven Mountain Holds list. And let me know in the chat or in the comments, if you're watching this later, what you would drop. I can't drop any of the core, because I'm only 504 points of 500. So I would have to exchange anything in the core for something else. So we're not freeing up points by doing that. Do you think I could expand the unit of Rangers and lower the number of Dwarf Warriors? Do you think I should expand the unit of Rangers and switch the Warriors for another shooter unit? In Special, do you think the Hammerers are doing a job there with the Thane, BSB? Do you think that's a necessary unit? Do you think that number of Hammers isn't powerful enough? Do you think there needs to be more? What would you take out to pay for that? Do you think the Gyrocopter's good, or would you rather have a Doomseeker or a Pony Cart? These are the questions that I'm putting to the community in my quest to actually build competitive lists. This isn't just for the old world, actually, because playing Age of Sigmar recently, I've decided that I'm going to try and get some units that are more competitive than the ones I'm currently using, and just trying to up my game a bit and actually trying to be more competitive in certain tournament scenes. Kings of War and Dead Zone, I think I'm fine there. I always do reasonably well, win a lot more games than I lose. And with Dead Zone, I'm generally challenging for winning the event, even if I don't win it. Kings of War, it's not unusual to see me challenging for the podium positions, even at medium to somewhat large events. It's not wild for that to happen. I think I've got some good army lists going there. Old World and Age of Sigmar, though, I think needed some work. So let me know how you would tweak this. I think this is the basis of something solid and competitive, and it's got some similarities to lists that I've seen run at events that have done well. The double Grudge Thrower, the big unit of Iron Drakes. Would you take an even bigger unit of Iron Drakes? Would you ditch the torpedoes and make one of them a detachment for the other one? Let me know. And what's coming up next? Well, there's a Kings of War tournament tomorrow that I'm attending, and I've got to get up early in the morning for that one. I've got to get up about 6 AM, get a train there. Then, the following weekend, there is a one-day Star Wars Shatterpoint event that I'm going to. I don't actually have any models for that game yet, so I'm borrowing some, because that's been picking up some traction down at the club. People are really enjoying that, so that's a fun game. I may well end up using the Ewoks, borrowing those off somebody for the event. But I've also actually ordered models for it now. I'm also looking at playing a game of Bolt Action soon, in addition to all my usual Old World and Age of Sigmar games. So there's going to be non-stop action on this channel. Then there are 2 Old World events coming up this month. One of them is the Riverlands event, which is a bit more fun and themed. There's going to be a lot of rivers on all the tables and special rules for them. And then there's another that's slightly more straightforward event. I think I've actually persuaded Rem to go to the Riverlands event as well. He says he's available, so we're just waiting for the classic Remington manoeuvre of having some last-minute thing come up that means he can't make it to the event. So we'll see. It will be his first Old World event if he does make it there. Right then. Lots of questions were posed to the audience in this video. Hopefully, either in the chat or in the comments, you can answer them. Give me some ideas. Let me know if you picked up anything interesting in this video. If you spotted any rules mistakes. We already spotted the forgetting that the large spawn was a large target. Anything else, let me know. And don't forget to check out all the links in the description. There's various social media shenanigans. There's Twitter, Discord server, Facebook group. And obviously, if you want the non-stop flow of content on this channel, you want me to be able to just buy endless Dwarfs forever, and whatever other game systems I'm investing in as well, then why not pledge your entire life savings into the Patreon or the PayPal, and then you can personally witness the payoff from your generous backing of the channel in the form of battle reports. And maybe some other kinds of videos coming up as well. I do occasionally cast an envious eye over all the other channels that just do endless tier lists. So I'm sure it would do well if I did some tier lists of all the armies I play, like Old World Dwarf units in a tier. I think people would like to see that. And then for Kings of War, I could do one for Abyssal Dwarves that I'm very familiar with. I think that'd be some quality content stretched out over a nice little time period. People like tier lists, is what I'm getting at. Okay, time to wrap this one up. All that remains to be said, other than thanks for tuning in, is good night out there, whatever you are.